Hi, everybody. I'm sorry about the washed out light here. It's that time of day when I got bright sun blowing right through the window. But today's talk is about the FDA's latest biocompatibility guidance. And this is really important that people understand this one point. The guidance says that it's how to apply ISO 10993 1. So the 10993 standard that is recognized by the FDA, they're telling you how to apply that. What they really mean is here's a guidance document telling you all the ways we disagree with the guidance that we recognize because it tells you things that they want you to do differently than what the guidance says. But guidance was designed to allow people to use rationales and justifications for why they don't need to do animal testing and why they can um, avoid certain endpoint testing and only have to do other endpoint testing. Um, the FDA wants you to have that ability, and they're open to the concept, but a lot of times what ends up happening is no, we're not going to let you do that. We want you to do this testing. And you can try all the justifications you want, but it's not going to work. But this particular live session, we're going to talk about the Annex G that they added at the end of this guidance. So there has been some minor changes to the guidance, but there is a new annex at the end, Annex G, and it talks about what they've done to allow companies that are making devices that are only going to contact intact skin. What are we going to do to allow them to avoid some testing to cut down on the amount of animal testing that needs to be done? And they've actually made some good strides here. So even though I would like to rant for a long time about all the things I don't like about this guidance document, they made an effort here. They tried to show if you have a device made out of one of these materials, and they gave you an actual list of materials, and it's only going to be in contact with intact skin, so not breached or compromised skin, then it would be acceptable to not submit testing data for these devices. So the examples that they give you of dev- materials that'll be allowed. I'll give you a few examples, not the whole list. So one would be ABS. A lot of plastic devices, including Legos, are made out of ABS. So that's one example. Cured epoxy adhesive. So anybody that's using an epoxy adhesive, that would be something that would be pretty common that you wouldn't have to do testing on it if it's only in contact with intact skin. Another example would be Parylene. A lot of devices, particularly tubing, they'll put a Parylene coating on it so it's not so sticky. It drags smoothly over the skin. Another one would be polycarbonate. So water bottles made out of polycarbonate, for example. Another one would be PEEK. This is an implant material after all. PEKK, also another implant material. PBACs would be an example of a catheter material. So these are materials that we use a lot for much more high risk activities than just touching your skin. High density polyethylene, that's what we make milk cartons out of. Low density polyethylene, sometimes it's a blend of those two materials. Polypropylene, that's what we make surgical masks out of. That's an example. Um, so all these are potential things that you won't have to do any more testing on. But there are criteria here. There are criteria. One of them is it can't be for something that's in contact with breached or compromised skin. So that makes sense because that increases the risk of it being exposure to the blood and having more of a strong immune response rather than just skin irritation. So that makes sense that they would say we're not going to go that far with this exemption. Another example is anything that's stored or contains fluids or creams. Those are going to be a problem because they're going to extract more things from the material than if you didn't have that. And I think I need to adjust the focus a little bit here. Sorry for that, folks. The next item, reprocess single-use devices. Now, if you read the rationale, I don't think they're just excluding that to reprocess single-use. I think they're just saying reprocess devices anyway, because what they're saying is reprocessing of devices can cause adverse biological reactions such as irritation. So what happens is the soaps and detergents that you use to disinfect something, those build up in the cracks and crevices of the device. So, and that causes a problem. And so they have to be cleaned more thoroughly, and they're often not. So there's a history of that being a problem, particularly for watches. I don't know if anybody remembers the Fitbit recall for watches that were causing irritation. Another one is adhesives that, so if you have like a hydrogel or something, that would not be allowed. But if you had some other type of adhesive that would be like on your nose or your skin, on your chest, or something for an electrode, that wouldn't be permitted. So they've identified a couple of things that they think are higher risk where it would still be touching the skin, and they don't want you to include those. So they've got a table of exclusions, and they have a list of natural and synthetic products that would be allowed. And everybody that is thinking, well, we wear clothing like this all the time. Cotton fabrics are on the list of those are okay. Silk fabrics that are also okay. After all, we make sutures out of silk, and you wear all kinds of clothes that are silk. And then rayon, which nobody really buys except the 70s, but rayon is a fabric material that you can use that will be okay as well. So they give you this long list. If you have one of those materials, and it's for intact skin use only, whether it's short, medium, or long-term use, the FDA is saying you might not have to do the testing on that. And they tell you what they want you to provide for information. If there are any colorants that you include, they want to know what those are, and they want to know what the toxicity is of those colorants. If you have a colorant that's potentially toxic, they're going to probably want some extractable leachables testing to show how much of that could be removed, and that can be fairly expensive. So you might have been better off picking a material that didn't have a colorant in it. Even though it may not look as pretty, it definitely will save you the hassle of doing that testing. But there are some problems with this Annex G. And one of the problems is they're not, in my opinion, they're not specific enough about what they want for the history. They say, other devices that have a safe history of use for this kind of material. Well, they're not, when I say they're not specific enough, the last item that's a synthetic material on the list is silicone. And I'm going to pick on that material because I know a ton about silicone. Silicone is dimethyl polysiloxane. It's a polymer made of a bunch of monomers with some cross linkages. But the monomers can have substitutions on them in small quantities or large quantities. And we still call it silicone. And is it short chain? Is it long chain? If I have really short chain, it becomes a liquid. So that wouldn't be okay. And we're pretty sure that those are not safe because whenever they have liquid silicone, it tends to cause immune responses. And they've ruled that out as you can't have liquid injections of silicone into people for implants. So there's a history of that not being safe. There's also some phenyl groups that you can substitute on these chain, and those will cause an immune response as well. Now, will they only cause an immune response for implants, or will they also cause an immune response on the skin? I don't know, because they're not considered medical grade. You can also have the type of curing that you do for silicone. There's platinum cured, and then there's a reaction where it's cross-linking because material is evaporating off when you heat material up. So you actually have to get it fully cured. You have to do a post-curing operation. So you mold the part and then you post-cure, basically bake it for a long time at lower temperature. And that post-curing operation can make it safer, but generally those materials are not considered medical grade. They're considered industrial grade. And we already had the PIP scandal for silicone that was industrial grade silicone. So saying silicone and not specifying these should be medical grade is probably a mistake. So whenever you're using these materials, you still should be doing your due diligence, making sure that the material from that supplier and that model, that specific model and the way it's made has a history. Not just silicone in general is safe, but this particular grade of silicone from this particular manufacturer manufactured this way is safe. I I don't have a problem with the FDA saying we don't need the testing, but you don't want a lawsuit later or have to recall product later like Fitbit did because you end up having problems with it. It's not necessarily a bad material, but people don't clean it well enough, or the shape of it in the texture of it can allow for buildup of skin. That can cause the irritation that ends up being recalled. So it might be a perfectly biocompatible material, but it's because it's reprocessed or reused and worn by people for a long period of time. You can have buildup and irritation. So think carefully, like, what is this material made out of? What is the texture of it? How is it molded? Is it molded the way I'm supposed to make sure it's medical grade? Um, don't add glues and adhesives if you don't have to. Um, in fact, one of the best methods out there is oftentimes if like you're going to use a polyurethane, if you and that is on the list, polyurethane, if you do solvent bonding. So you have two materials that are similar and you do a solvent bonding of that, the solvent evaporates off and now it's safe to use because you haven't used an adhesive that would cause irritation. And the solvent all flashes off during the, if not just evaporation, you heat it up a little bit. So look at what your process is, look at how it's going to be used, look at who your supplier is, look at, do they already have some testing to support this as medical grade. Don't just blindly say, oh, it's silicone, so it's on the list, so I don't have to worry about this. You have to be much more careful. Now, the FDA also has some criteria in here for quality system requirements. They don't have that anywhere else for quality system requirements, but it's not anywhere else in the guidance document for 10993, but in general, every single material you put in a device, you're supposed to be doing the design controls for it. You're supposed to be identifying your verification tests, your validation tests. You're supposed to be making sure that whoever makes it, whatever the manufacturing process is, that's reviewed and approved and validated because you do process validation, and you put that in your DMR. You would collect complaints. You would open up CAPAs if you see a problem. You would do trend analysis of feedback from customers and complaints and see if there is an alarming trend. All these things are normal things that you would do, but the FDA felt it was necessary to put in here, you have to do these things. I think they could have just skipped that part. I think it confuses people. So, why did they put DMR in there and not put in the DHF? I have no idea. Why did they put in statistical analysis and data analysis and reference the CAPA clause instead of the statistical techniques clause? I have no idea. But in general, all the things that you have to do, no matter what, for the QSR, you still have to do for these too. So I think, unfortunately, it was confusing to add those things in there, and they should have just left that alone because they're already required. But they're reminding you have to have supplier controls, you have to have a DMR, you have to have approved outputs, you have to control those. You can't just make changes to things and not reevaluate. And as you have product use over time, you have to make sure that if you have any problems with the device, you're going to consider the need for opening up a CAPA and maybe even replacing a material that's causing some problems. So those are things that you need to look at carefully when you're using this Annex G. But on the face of it, it looks like there's some potential here for a lot of companies that are making lower risk devices that touch intact skin to get out of a lot of testing that was wasteful. We already know this material is biocompatible. It's been tested a billion times. Let's not test it one more time and save some guinea pigs and some rabbits, and let's just use the documentation that already exists out there to say, this was a safe material. It's been used by all these other products that are on the market. It'll be safe for ours too. So that's what is in this new guidance document. I put a link down below for you to use it, that guidance and go to Annex G. But if you have questions about how to present this to the FDA in a pre-sub, and you probably should before you use it, more than happy to answer your questions. Just click on the link for a Calendly meeting on our website. There's a contact us page and a Calendly link. You can schedule a meeting with us, and we can help you with how to frame the argument and what information to provide the FDA so they can be confident. Yes, this will be okay to use without doing the testing. I hope that helps. And we won't have a live tomorrow because I'm doing it today instead of tomorrow, so I can go to parent-teacher conferences. And I'll see you next week. Actually, I take that back. I won't see you next week because I'm doing an FDA inspection next week. So 2 weeks. We're going to miss next week. I'll see you in 2 weeks. And if you have any suggestions for topics for the next live, put it down below in the comments. Bye-bye.